The transmission line alone has the potential to create $10 billion in new economic activity in this area, while reducing emissions by up to 3 million tons annually.
It's such a big deal to BC.
If you can't get electricity to a mine, then you don't have a mine.
Just 75% of Canada's known copper reserves, and gold, and silver, and other critical minerals. There are several existing and proposed mines in the area, including Red Chris.
Canada just sent a shockwave through North America's energy landscape. By unlocking access to nearly three-quarters of the nation's copper reserves, Canada is positioning itself as one of the world's most important suppliers of the metal that powers the entire clean energy revolution. Meanwhile, the United States under President Donald Trump is marching backwards, dismantling renewable projects and dragging its energy policy back into the 1980s. The contrast is unmistakable. Canada is engineering the economy of 2035, while America is rewinding itself to 1985. The breakthrough comes from British Columbia, where the federal government and Premier David Eby have fast-tracked the North Coast Transmission Line, now classified as a nation-building project. This massive energy corridor will stretch hundreds of kilometers across BC's northern interior, linking hydroelectric power from the coast to some of the most mineral-rich land in the country. Up in that region lies roughly 75% of Canada's confirmed copper deposits. These are not speculative estimates, but verified reserves needed for the global build-out of electric vehicles, batteries, charging stations, transmission systems, and large-scale solar and wind installations. The new line will allow mines to open, expand, and operate using clean electricity rather than diesel, giving Canada a competitive edge other producers simply cannot replicate. Premier Eby has publicly stated that this project is so essential that he is willing to stake his government on its success. The Canada Infrastructure Bank has already committed major funding, and construction is expected to begin by summer. Ottawa sees this as one of the most consequential economic projects in a generation, and provincial leaders agree. Copper is no longer just a metal. It is the backbone of every modern energy system. A single electric vehicle requires several times more copper than a traditional gasoline car. Every kilometer of new transmission line relies on copper. Solar farms, wind turbines, battery storage facilities, and next-generation data centers all depend on it. Global agencies like the International Energy Agency and major financial institutions have warned that the world is heading toward an acute copper shortage that will last for years. Canada is acting before that shortage becomes a crisis. By electrifying BC's mineral corridor with clean hydropower, Canada is creating a mining ecosystem that is not only abundant, but also low emission and globally competitive. This positions the country as a premier supplier in a world that will soon be desperate for stable, ethical, low-carbon copper. While others are scrambling to secure supply, Canada is quietly securing its future. The situation in the United States is dramatically different. America's copper production is declining, its major mines are aging, and new mining proposals are stuck in environmental litigation or blocked by state-level opposition. At the very moment the U.S. needs more copper than ever to power electric vehicles, rebuild its aging transmission grid, and support surging AI-driven energy demand, the country is running short. Making matters worse, Trump's policies are stripping away America's renewable infrastructure faster than the market can replace it. Reuters recently confirmed the cancellation of more than $600 million in federal support for offshore wind. AP News reported that multiple states are now suing Washington for obstructing clean energy development. Investors warn that the U.S. is losing ground in both grid modernization and renewable deployment, two areas where copper demand is skyrocketing. This is the paradox of Trump's second term. America is weakening the sector that needs minerals the most, while simultaneously doing nothing to secure the minerals required to revive it. It is a strategy locked in the past, designed for the energy politics of the 1980s, not the realities of a decarbonizing world. Canada's strategy is much more coherent. The country already supplies most of America's crude oil imports, and that position gives Canada enormous leverage in energy diplomacy. Now, by expanding transmission infrastructure, scaling hydro capacity, accelerating critical mineral extraction, and integrating First Nations directly into major projects, Canada is building an energy system that is cleaner, more resilient, and more future-proof than almost any other developed nation. These shifts do not happen in isolation. They reinforce each other. Clean power enables clean mining. Clean mining strengthens export markets. Export markets fund further infrastructure. Infrastructure attracts investment from allies looking for stable, democratic suppliers. Canada is constructing a long-term industrial ecosystem while the U.S. is tearing down its renewable foundations. In the background, China continues to dominate the global copper processing and refining market. The U.S. has no immediate path to compete. That reality makes Canada even more important because if Washington wants secure, low-risk copper from a trusted partner, it will eventually have to look north, regardless of Trump's rhetoric. Canada's advantage becomes undeniable as the world races to electrify. Grid upgrades, battery plants, and clean steel projects in Europe and Asia all demand vast amounts of copper, and few democracies can supply it at scale. Canada can, and with the North Coast transmission line, it can do so cleanly. Investment is already shifting north. Capital is flowing into Canadian mineral projects and hydropowered industrial hubs because they offer stability and low geopolitical risk. While the U.S. battles over permits and weakens its renewable sector, Canada is winning the confidence of industries planning decades ahead. The widening gap reflects intention, discipline, and a long-term strategy the U.S. simply no longer follows.
Every major transition in the global economy is marked by a resource shift. Coal once shaped empires. Oil reshaped geopolitics. Critical minerals like copper, nickel, lithium, and rare earth elements are shaping the next chapter. Canada is one of the few nations with high-quality reserves, political stability, environmental standards, and the clean energy needed to process these minerals responsibly. Trump's America, by contrast, is moving in the opposite direction, rolling back renewable policies, delaying infrastructure, and clinging to fossil fuel nostalgia. Even U.S. allies and investors see the pattern. America is stepping away from the future, just as Canada is stepping into it. The North Coast transmission line is not just an energy project. It is a declaration that Canada no longer intends to be a passive participant in the global mineral economy. It is choosing leadership.
Canada is building the energy and mineral architecture of the next century. It is electrifying regions that were once unreachable, unlocking resources that the world is desperate for, and positioning itself as a clean energy superpower at the very moment its closest neighbor is choosing to look backward. The question now is not whether Canada can lead. The real question is how far ahead Canada will be by the time the United States realizes the world has changed and asks Canada for the copper, the clean power, and the vision it failed to secure for itself.
And that old world, the world in which APEC prospered, but also helped to foster, that old world of steady expansion of rules-based liberalized trade and investment, a world on which so much of our nation's prosperity, very much Canada's included, that world is gone. I think we have to be clear-eyed about that reality, because nostalgia is not a strategy.
At the 2025 APEC summit in South Korea, most speeches followed the familiar rhythm of global diplomacy, vague calls for cooperation and stability. Then Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke, and the tone shifted. That old world, he said, of steady expansion of rules-based liberalized trade and investment, that world is gone. It was a moment of quiet rupture. Carney was not simply describing change, he was announcing it. Canada, a nation often defined by proximity to American power, was signaling that it was done living in the shadow of Washington's playbook. His words carried the composure of a former central banker and the intent of a strategist who knew exactly what message he was sending. This was more than a speech. It was a manifesto for how middle powers survive in an age of economic nationalism.
Carney's remarks stood apart from the usual APEC script. Instead of repeating phrases about open markets or shared prosperity, he warned that nostalgia was no longer a strategy. He told the room, quote, "We have to be clear-eyed about that reality. Nostalgia is not a strategy," end quote. The honesty hit differently. While others sidestepped the cracks in the global trade system, Carney confronted them directly. He described a turning point in world history as significant as the early 1990s, when APEC was born out of Cold War optimism. But this time, the forces reshaping the world were more complex: artificial intelligence, energy transition, and geopolitical fragmentation. By acknowledging that reality, Carney elevated Canada's position. The power of his message came from restraint. He did not dramatize the crisis, he clarified it. And in a hall full of leaders defending old habits, his realism sounded revolutionary. Carney's central idea was simple but profound. The global order that once relied on predictable, rules-based trade has collapsed. Our world, he said, is undergoing one of the most profound shifts since the fall of the Berlin Wall. For decades, countries assumed that global commerce was governed by institutions and norms that kept politics and economics apart. That assumption no longer holds. Tariffs, technology bans, and strategic export controls have become the new instruments of power. In acknowledging that shift, Carney was doing more than lamenting a lost system. He was defining Canada's role in what comes next. What comes next is ours to build, he said. At the core of this will be a new partnership between government and business in service of our citizens. The line captured the essence of his vision: pragmatic cooperation instead of ideological confrontation. Canada would not wait for a new set of global rules, it would help write them.
We want to build big things with nations and companies who share our ambition and our belief that we are stronger together. So our government is charting a new course with an ambitious mission to double our non-US exports over the course of the next decade. And we're already making significant progress.
Carney's speech then moved from vision to execution. He laid out an ambitious strategy to diversify Canada's economy and redefined its alliances. "We are charting a new course," he said, "with an ambitious mission to double our non-US exports over the next decade." That mission is already in motion. Ottawa has signed new agreements with the United Arab Emirates on artificial intelligence and infrastructure, with the European Union on defense and trade, and with Germany on critical minerals. Negotiations with ASEAN are entering their final phase, while bilateral free trade talks with the Philippines and Thailand are set for next year. In South Korea, Carney announced something unprecedented: a new security and defense cooperation partnership, the first of its kind for Canada in the Indo-Pacific. The agreement expands into cyber, space, and hybrid threat cooperation, strengthening Canada's presence in a region where U.S. influence is being contested. Beneath these moves lies a foundation of energy and resources. By 2030, Canada will produce 50 million tons of LNG each year, all destined for Asian markets. By 2040, we will double that amount at least. Canada's grid is already 85% clean, and the government plans to increase that by half through nuclear and small modular reactors. In Toronto, Carney noted that Canada would soon announce over 20 new investment deals in critical minerals, totaling almost $2 billion of support. These are not small gestures. They are structural bets on the future of supply chains. Throughout the address, Carney never mentioned the United States by name. He did not need to. Every sentence contrasted with Washington's current playbook. Certainty, he said, is the greatest currency in commerce. It was a statement aimed squarely at a trading system increasingly defined by unpredictability. Under President Trump, U.S. policy has become reactive, imposing tariffs, revising deals, and turning trade into a test of loyalty. For investors and allies, this constant recalibration has created doubt. Carney's Canada is positioning itself as the antidote to that volatility. You crave in an uncertain world the certainty you deserve, he told the audience. His point was unmistakable. Canada offers what America no longer can: stability, reliability, and respect for the spirit of agreements, not just their letters. This was a diplomatic warning cloaked in optimism. If Washington continues to use economic coercion as a political tool, its allies will chart their own paths. And Ottawa is already leading the way through its outreach to Asia, partnerships in Europe, and resource diplomacy across the Indo-Pacific. The deeper message of Carney's speech was about identity. Canada is redefining itself not as a dependent economy, but as a builder of trust in an unstable world. He described a nation rich in both resources and intellect. We have more than 2 million STEM graduates, he said, the most educated workforce in the world per capita. Canada's financial strength gives it leverage few realize. Its pension funds control roughly $3 trillion in capital, among the largest in the world. 40% of all listed mining companies are headquartered or listed in Canada, anchoring a global network of resource investment. Carney tied this capacity to a moral argument that Canada's advantage lies in doing business with integrity. Certainty comes not only from agreements, he said, but also from trust, from partners who respect the spirit and the values behind agreements. This was not just economic positioning, it was soft power reframed as industrial strategy. When Carney ended with the words, "Canada is ready to build the new architecture for trade and investment," it felt like both an invitation and a declaration. He was offering an alternative model of power, quiet, consistent, and credible. His vision does not challenge Washington with confrontation, but with contrast. Where the U.S. measures strength in tariffs and leverage, Canada measures it in reliability and foresight. Carney's tone was not emotional, yet it stirred something deeper: the sense that smaller nations can still shape global systems if they act with purpose. The applause that followed was polite, but the message lingered long after. Canada had spoken not just to APEC, but to the world. The rules of trade are changing, and the nations that build trust will define the next era. And for Washington, Carney's message was unmistakable. The world is moving on, and this time Canada intends to lead the way.
If the EV tariffs are removed, then China will also remove the tariffs on the relevant products of Canada.
The premiers of Manitoba and Saskatchewan want Ottawa to scrap its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, now that China is pledging to lift its punishing tariffs on Canadian pork and canola in exchange.
While President Trump tightens every screw of his global tariff machine, another sound is rising from the north, the quiet stir of a shift Canada did not plan for but may now have to embrace. In Beijing, officials have made an unexpected offer. If Canada lifts its 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles, China will remove its punishing duties on Canadian pork and canola. The proposal sounds technical, almost bureaucratic, yet beneath it lies a potential realignment of power in North America. For years, Canada's trade path ran in one direction, south toward Washington. But with Trump's second-term tariffs squeezing every major sector, from autos to aluminum, Canada's room to maneuver has narrowed. The Chinese offer arrives like a test. Will Ottawa continue to align with Trump's protectionist wall or begin to carve a new route through it? This is not a story of friendship or betrayal. It is about survival in a moment when trade has become a weapon and allies are forced to find air wherever they can breathe.
China's proposal was simple on paper but strategic in timing. Over the past year, as the United States imposed sweeping tariffs of up to 100% on Chinese imports under Section 232 and IEEPA powers, global supply chains were forced to adjust. Chinese automakers like BYD, SAIC, and NIO have been locked out of North America even as they expanded aggressively across Europe and Southeast Asia. Canada followed Washington's lead last year, matching the United States with its own 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. At the time, it was framed as solidarity with the American position, a move to protect domestic manufacturing and aligned with U.S. industrial policy. But the decision came with consequences. Within months, Beijing retaliated with tariffs on key Canadian exports, hitting pork, seafood, and canola. The duties, some as high as 75%, according to Reuters reports in August 2025, created a financial shock across Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Farmers faced collapsing prices and uncertain planting seasons. That is why Beijing's latest proposal to lift those tariffs in exchange for the EV tariff being removed struck a nerve in Ottawa. It was more than a trade offer, it was a pressure valve. For China, the move signaled a tactical pivot, using market access rather than retaliation to win influence. For Canada, it forced a choice between protecting its auto industry or saving thousands of agricultural jobs. And that choice may ultimately reveal how far Trump's tariff policy has cornered his closest ally.
Trump's second-term economic agenda was designed around one idea: use tariffs not only to protect American factories, but to enforce political loyalty. By applying broad, unpredictable duties, 25% on Canadian steel, 10% on aluminum, 25% on trucks and furniture, Washington turned tariffs into tools of leverage. At first, Canada complied. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government held the line, matching some tariffs and negotiating exemptions where possible. But as the trade burden deepened, provinces began to fracture. Manitoba and Saskatchewan, dependent on agricultural exports, pushed for relief. Ontario and Quebec, home to automakers and suppliers, warned against letting cheap EVs flood the market. The real turning point was not emotional, but structural. Ottawa began to realize that the United States had built a system where every Canadian industry was one policy shift away from crisis. Trump's tariffs were no longer just about China. They had created a dependency loop where U.S. domestic politics dictated Canada's economic breathing space. So when Beijing extended its hand, Canada did not see friendship, it saw an exit route. By negotiating directly with China, Ottawa could test whether its economy could survive beyond Washington's shadow. This is the deeper meaning of the backfire. Tariffs that were meant to keep supply chains loyal to the U.S. are now driving allies to experiment with new partnerships. Canada's exploration of a limited EV tariff rollback is less about siding with China and more about regaining control over its own trade agenda. Trump's policies did not just isolate China, they began to isolate the United States itself.
The idea of Canada considering any economic alignment with Beijing was once unthinkable in Washington. Yet by October 2025, it is a legitimate policy debate. Ottawa's review of the EV tariff, confirmed by federal officials last week, marks the first time since the 2018 steel dispute that Canada has publicly diverged from U.S. trade direction. Economists at the University of British Columbia describe this moment as a soft decoupling. Canada is not leaving the American orbit, but it is gradually building a multi-vector trade model, one that includes the European Union, Japan, ASEAN, and increasingly China. The implications stretch far beyond tariffs. If China succeeds in reopening agricultural trade while gaining partial EV access to Canada, it could establish the first North American foothold for Chinese electric cars. That would reshape supply chains, investment flows, and potentially employment patterns within the continent. For Washington, this would be an unwelcome development. Trump's team has framed tariffs as a shield for national security. But Canada's recalibration shows that the shield can also act as a barrier between allies. The new reality is that North America no longer operates under a single economic rhythm. The United States is tightening, Canada is adapting. As China exploits the gap, the region risks drifting into two parallel systems, one protectionist and one adaptive, both competing for stability. The consequences could be long-lasting. Canada's farmers may recover, but the continent's political cohesion may not. Every tariff war eventually redraws the map. This one is no different.
What began as Trump's attempt to dominate global trade has produced a more complex world, one where even America's closest neighbor is testing the edges of independence. In the short term, China's offer may give Canadian farmers the breathing room they desperately need. In the long term, it may push North America toward an economic realignment that no one fully controls. The story unfolding is not about who wins the tariff game. It is about who learns to live outside of it. Canada's choice in the coming weeks will speak louder than any statement from Washington or Beijing. Whether Ottawa decides to lift its EV tariff or hold the line, one fact is clear. Trump's trade walls are no longer keeping his allies in place. They are showing them the exits.
When it comes to trade relations, the future of the North American economy is at stake.
I am optimistic about the future because I look at the past.
Canadians staying home, that's their business. If you want to ban American alcohol, that's fine. There are reasons why the president and some of his team refer to Canada as being mean and nasty to deal with.
When the American ambassador lashes out at Canada, does it reveal U.S. frustration or Canadian resilience? That question surfaced after Pete Hoekstra, speaking in Halifax, dismissed Ottawa's Elbows Up campaign as anti-American. His criticism was meant as a warning, yet many Canadians interpreted it as proof that their pushback is being felt in Washington. Far from backing down, people across the country felt encouraged to stand taller, to buy Canadian goods, and to view the dispute as a chance to show unity. What was framed as an insult ended up reinforcing confidence that Canada's defensive stance is not only necessary, but effective.
The spark for this moment lies in Washington's tariff strategy. Under President Trump's second term, reciprocal tariffs have been rolled out aggressively. In March 2025, the White House imposed a 25% duty on imported cars and auto parts under Section 232. By July, a 50% tariff on copper was added, alongside restrictions on high-grade scrap copper. Steel and aluminum remain under heavy duties as well. The Department of Commerce itself confirmed that these sectoral tariffs are designed to expand beyond metals, and Canadian producers have been bracing for the next wave. What this has created is not compliance, but uncertainty. Business leaders in both countries point to the same reality. Investments stall when duties appear and disappear at a president's discretion. For Canadians, the lesson is clear. Trump's strategy has not weakened their resolve. Instead, it has driven consumers to buy Canadian, reinforced a culture of resilience, and made clear that reliance on American goodwill is a risk too great to ignore.
The Prime Minister kicked it off by traveling to Mexico last week for a summit without America. Mark Carney and his Mexican counterpart, Claudia Sheinbaum, signed an agreement aimed at deepening trade and investment between the two countries.
That realization explains why Prime Minister Mark Carney moved quickly to deepen ties with Mexico. Just days before Halifax, Carney met President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City and signed a bilateral agreement on trade and investment. This was no symbolic gesture. It was the first step in repositioning Canada inside North America's supply chain ahead of the 2026 review of the Trade Pact. By linking arms with Mexico, Canada shows that it can look beyond Washington. The Trudeau years often left Canada reacting to U.S. policy, but Carney is signaling a different path. Mexico offers a growing market for Canadian agriculture, energy, and manufacturing inputs. More importantly, this partnership sends a message to Washington that Ottawa is not negotiating alone. It also reassures Canadian businesses that the government is actively seeking stability. For farmers worried about canola exports or for auto suppliers nervous about new tariffs, the Mexico deal represents a lifeline. It does not erase the challenges of U.S. duties, but it creates an environment where Canadian producers can plan with greater confidence, knowing alternative channels are being built. Canada is searching out options in Europe, in Asia, and even cautiously in China, but Mexico is the most immediate and powerful lever. It transforms American pressure into an opportunity to rewire continental trade flows. The review of the USMCA, or CUSMA in Canada, will not erase the agreement. Few expect it to disappear. What is far more likely is a tightening of rules of origin, making it harder for Canadian products to qualify for duty-free access. That prospect is serious, yet it does not erase the shift we are witnessing now. American frustration, voiced bluntly in Halifax, has not intimidated Canadians. Instead, it has accelerated their search for partners and renewed their confidence in standing firm. Tariffs that were meant to corner Canada have united its consumers, its industries, and its leaders. Trump may say he loves tariffs, but the more he leans on them, the more Canada looks outward and discovers new strength. If Washington's disappointment is what fuels Canadian pride, then the balance of advantage in North America is already beginning to tilt in a new direction.
Headlines concerning ag-related bankruptcies are on the rise.
Farmland here in the Midwest is abundant, with farmers growing corn, soybeans, alfalfa, dairy, and beef. But recently, in the first quarter of this year, many farmers couldn't repay their debts.
Farmers are under a tremendous amount of economic stress.
Across America's farmland, daily life is filled with challenges. Weather, debt, and volatile prices already weigh on farmers. In 2025, tariffs have made the burden heavier. President Trump's trade war is not an abstract debate in Washington. It is a reality shaping whether family farms can survive another season.
We worry about drought, we worry about pricing, we worry about equipment, we worry about financing. This tariff is just another thing that we have to worry about.
Soybean farmers in Iowa, who depend heavily on exports, are facing deep uncertainty. China, the largest buyer of soybeans worldwide, has not pre-purchased shipments for this year's harvest. Normally, China takes more than 1/5 of U.S. exports. Without that market, bins of soybeans may sit unsold, while bills for fertilizer and equipment keep climbing. John Deere has warned that tariffs on steel and aluminum will add $600 million to its costs in 2025. Those increases trickle down to every farmer who needs a tractor or a part repaired. The story of soybeans captures the larger picture. American agriculture produces far more than the nation consumes, which means exports are essential. When tariffs close doors abroad, farmers cannot simply sell everything at home. Prices drop and revenue shrinks. This is not a new problem. In the 2018 trade dispute, retaliatory tariffs from China cost U.S. agriculture $27 billion, with soybeans alone making up 71% of the losses. Now history is repeating. Brazil has taken advantage of the opening, surpassing the United States as the world's leading soybean exporter. Farmers in the Midwest watch as markets they spent decades building slip away. Meanwhile, the costs of production continue to climb. Fertilizer, farm machinery, and fuel all carry higher prices because of tariffs on metals and other inputs. What was once a narrow profit margin has been squeezed to the breaking point. The financial stress is showing up in bankruptcy courts. In the first quarter of 2025, farm bankruptcies under Chapter 12 rose 95% compared to a year earlier, according to federal filings. Chapter 12 is a special part of U.S. bankruptcy law created for farmers and fishermen. It allows them to reorganize debts and keep their farms running while they work out a payment plan, rather than being forced to sell everything at once. In 2024, farmers in the Midwest filed 71 of these cases, a 69% increase from 2023. Behind every statistic is a family under pressure, often losing land and machinery after generations of work. When small and medium-sized farms collapse, their assets are usually purchased by large agribusiness operations. The trend toward consolidation accelerates, leaving even less space for family farms that still make up 95% of America's agricultural backbone. For many, the promise that tariffs would shield rural America rings hollow. Instead, they feel exposed to forces beyond their control, with little protection as prices drop and debts mount. Farming is more than business. It is legacy, culture, and identity. Yet that legacy is now at risk. Exports are falling, bankruptcies are rising, and uncertainty is spreading across the countryside.
Even with new federal commitments, such as the $65 billion in agricultural spending signed into law in July, most of the money is directed toward crop insurance and disaster assistance. Those programs may soften the impact of bad weather, but they cannot restore lost markets or stabilize prices. American farmers know the stakes. Without reliable trade partners and consistent policy, no amount of short-term aid will be enough. What they need is clarity, not chaos. They need stability, not shifting tariffs. Until that arrives, the reality remains the same. Trump's tariffs are leaving America's farmers squeezed between falling crop prices and rising costs, struggling to hold on to their land and wondering if the family farm can survive another year.